afternoon of April 11, 1945. Troops of the US First Army are advancing towards a small mountain. Their map tells them it is the Kronstein near Nordhausen. Past suspicious-looking railway and power installations, the road and tracks lead directly to the factory. The servicemen have not been told by their superiors what exactly is hidden inside the rock. Behind a bend, a German civilian is waiting, Director Dr. Alwyn Zawadzki, ready to hand over his weapons factory, codenamed Mittelwerk.
It is night, and I'm asleep. And once I saw myself pressed against the wall, and there were people I knew, their faces like masks, dancing past me silently. Couples were dancing past me. I recognized them, but they didn't recognize me. And that's how I relive Dora, Kronstein Mountain, every night.
Dora, so erlebe ich den Kronstein noch jede Nacht.
You have to see all this in the context of the time. I mean, we had total war, and anything was possible in these conditions. So it was possible, too, to organize these things together in the smallest imaginable space. There was this high technology, which wasn't entirely perfect yet, and to which hasty improvements kept being made. And then there was the cheap labor to be used for any purpose. And all this with the aim, under a good deal of compulsion of course, of producing the best possible in the shortest possible time, namely the VIV weapon.
Und das alles mit dem Ziel, unter viel Zwang natürlich, das Beste und das auf schnellstmöglichen Wege herauszubringen, nämlich die Vergeltungswaffe.
Total war, combining all available forces in planning and carrying out construction, is the order of the day. The war construction methods developed and implemented by Reich Minister Speer and his staff have resulted in a very short space of time in the development and build-up of a war industry, which guarantees a victorious end to the war despite the bombing terror. Our brave soldiers must be given ever new top-quality weapons in growing numbers.
Films intended to beef up morale and musical request programs determined the ideological day-to-day life of Germans during those months of 1943. I Know a Miracle Will Happen One Day, a hit tune sung by Zara Leander, was very much to the point. Stalingrad was over, the Allied bombers dominated the skies over Germany, and any expression of doubt about ultimate victory was a sure way to end up in court. At home and at the front, first rumors about a secret miracle weapon that would totally change the military situation were making the rounds.
Arms and ammunition, that is the order from the front. The homeland itself become a front is carrying it out to the last.
This miracle weapon had been launched successfully into the noon sky over Pomerania from the Army Weapons Test Range at Peenemünde on October the 3rd, 1942. It was a liquid fuel rocket, a future Vergeltungswaffe, or retaliatory weapon called the V2, developed by Walter Dornberger, a military officer, and Werner von Braun, a civilian scientist, then 30 years old, together with a team of scientists, designers and soldiers. Military leaders and Nazi big shots, here Albrecht of the Army High Command, Armaments Minister Todt and General Leib of the Army Weapons Office, were interested. Speer, who took over as armaments minister, favoured the project, but the decision was up to Hitler himself. Having been acquainted with the project at his Wolfslehr command post in East Prussia, Hitler eventually ordered that the rocket construction program be given top priority. Hitler was impressed by von Braun's explanations and the films of the rocket he was shown. SS Chief Himmler, who had long tried to get control of the program, offered the SS to round up the manpower needed for the production of the V weapons. In the summer of 1943, British and American aircraft bombed and badly damaged the existing assembly plants at Wiener Neustadt, Friedrichshafen and Peenemünde. This hastened the decision to set up a central underground assembly plant for the V2 near Nordhausen in central Germany, in a region the Nazis called Mittelraum or Middle Area. This map, drawn by the Americans at the end of the war, shows the Kornstein facility as a fully developed armaments plant. Nazi plans provided for a whole number of secret underground installations in this geographically undefined middle area. Weapons plants and research laboratories were set up here in tunnels, bunkers and vaults deep below ground. Hitler's last command bunker was built here, and gold, money, documents and even the coffins of past royalty were hidden in this region. SS Brigadeführer Heinz Kammler commanded the army of slave labourers who were forced to build all this at Kornstein Mountain as elsewhere. On August 28, 1943, 107 concentration camp prisoners arrived outside Nordhausen.
Als wir einer Stadt vorbeifuhren, habe ich ein Schild oder irgendwas angeschrieben gesehen.
As we passed the town, I saw a sign or something that said Nordhausen. And maybe a quarter of an hour later, the military truck stopped at the foot of a mountain covered by dense forest. And then I saw a pile of bodies. That was nothing new to me, because I had seen this sort of thing at Buchenwald before, when the bodies were sent back from Dora to Buchenwald. But when I saw this here, I asked myself where all these bodies had come from. There were only a few huts, but so many bodies. And then I also saw overseers and foremen in prison uniforms marked with a green triangle worn by common criminals.
Und dann habe ich gesehen Kapos und Vorarbeiter mit einem grünen Winkel.
The enemy's intention of wrecking German armament by systematic and massive bombing has failed. Production facilities of war-deciding importance were shifted underground in time and with German thoroughness.
As early as 1936, work had begun at Kornstein Hill on an extensive network of tunnels to house a fuel depot. From 1943, concentration camp prisoners were forced to finish the work. Digging tunnels took precedence over building accommodation. Within a few months, transport after transport of prisoners arrived. Until concentration camp Dora was ready, the prisoners stayed underground for months. Dora was a subsidiary of Buchenwald, but became an independent camp at the end of 1944, the last concentration camp set up by the SS. By January 1944, more than 12,000 people were working to complete the rocket factory's 2 parallel main tunnels, each 1.8 kilometers or over a mile long, and the 50 connecting tunnels between them. In addition, a crematorium was built.
We had to go into the tunnel and work with big pneumatic drills. I worked only night shifts for half a year. We had to go into the tunnel to drill the holes for the explosives. and we had to stay and take cover behind the rocks lying there when the explosives were detonated. A signal horn was blown, and we had to seek cover. We couldn't leave the tunnel because they wouldn't let us out. And after the explosion, we could hardly see each other for dust, and many were killed by flying rock.
Und nach der Sprengung, da haben wir uns selbst nicht mehr wiedergesehen, von dem Staub. Und viele sind auch durch die Steine, die da geflogen sind, umgekommen, nicht?
Many worn-out prisoners crept away into some corner to die. Others were beaten to death. It was prisoner Albert van Dijk's duty to find and count them.
Der stete Aufenthalt im Dunkeln, der stete Umgang mit dem Tod.
The permanent darkness and my constant encounters with death depressed me very much. And I kept looking up at the ceiling, hoping to see a ray of sunlight. And I felt so sad. I often felt like lying down and dying myself. Those were moments when I wasn't mentally in control of myself. But when I found back to myself, I resolved I didn't want to die down here. I wanted to die outside in the warming sunlight.
Ich möchte sterben in der erwärmenden Strahlung der Sonne draußen.
Ja, hier haben Privatfirmen also gearbeitet. Wie viele weiß ich nicht.
Yes, there were private firms working here. I don't know how many, I just know 2 of them. There was this one firm I can mention, a firm from Bad Sachsa, which is in Bad Sachsa now. There was this man who carried a stick, a club, and if the prisoners didn't work fast enough, he beat them with it really hard.
The young secretary's boss was an engineer, a civilian employee. It was like this. He called me into the office and I sat there, and then he cut some slices of bread and put them on the desk. Then he called in a prisoner. The bread was still lying on the desk, and he swept it off the desk to the floor and said to me, my name was still Clayman then, Miss Clayman, we don't eat bread that's been on the floor, do we? And then he said to the prisoner, take the bread away, please, and throw it away. You see, he didn't say eat it, because naturally we weren't allowed to do that. He told him to take it away, and what the prisoner did with it then was his own affair.
I was telling you just now about the concreting we were doing, a real rush job. And if these boys couldn't keep up with the pace, the civilian took part in the beating. I saw that with my own eyes. They beat them, and when they couldn't get away, they had the concrete poured over them. They're still inside there now.
Und da haben sie geschlagen und die konnten gar nicht mehr wegkommen und die wurden sie zugeschüttet mit Zementbeton. Die liegen jetzt noch drin.
The first V weapons are increasingly hitting the enemy. Others, still more effective, will follow until victory is ours.
The V2 had a rival, the V1, which had the same range and carried the same load of explosives, but was cheaper to produce. However, it was possible to intercept it, while all known defences were powerless against the V2's supersonic flight. The initial plan provided for the mass production of 900 V2 rockets a month by the end of 1943. Employment of this weapon against Britain was supposed to reverse the course of the war, a futile hope from the start. Arthur Rudolph, director of Mittelwerk V2 production, quote, "The prisoners were glad when they were allowed to work on the V2, which was easy work, instead of having to dig tunnels or lay railway tracks and build roads," unquote.
Ich hatte auch völlig erfrorene Füße durch diesen Todesmarsch.
I had badly frozen feet from this death march during this harsh winter. At the gate, the SS were inspecting the people to see if they were still capable of working or not. Those who looked ill were sorted out right away, and so I said I'd walk on my own now. I gritted my teeth and marched through the camp. That was one chance of survival. A second chance with another sorting inside the camp. Skilled workers to the right, the others to the left. I myself only survived by accidentally standing with the so-called skilled workers, even though I didn't have any skills.
Mich eingereiht habe zu den sogenannten Facharbeitern, obwohl ich gar keine Ahnung hatte, und ich wurde an eine Drehbank
I was assigned to a lathe and had to meet a certain quota. My relief at this lathe was a Soviet prisoner of war who did my work in addition to his own, so that I always met my daily quota.
Sodass ich also immer auch mein Pensum damit erfüllen konnte.
Early one morning I turned up for work and there were children in the hall cleaning sheet metal. That was the first time I saw children there, fairly late in the war that was. Once I also saw children arrive together with prisoners. They were quite small, under 10 years old I'd say. Most prisoners were holding children by the hand and some carried them on their shoulders. They really were quite small. I was a bit shocked seeing that, of course.
Also sie waren ziemlich klein. War natürlich irgendwie ein bisschen geschockt, wie ich das gesehen habe.
First of all, there were the Russians, who stuck together very firmly, and the Czechs and also partly the French. The Germans kept together rather less, but that was partly because there were many common criminals among the German prisoners, and the two groups didn't get on so well with each other. There was quite a bit of mutual betrayal and denunciation and so on, while the others, the Russians above all, carried out a lot of sabotage.
Quote, "There was no organized sabotage against the V2. What sometimes looked like sabotage was due to the V2s being by no means fully ready yet for production, which caused considerable manufacturing problems. In addition, in the starting phase, prisoners were insufficiently trained or were not skilled enough to assemble a precision device such as the V2, so that they had to be replaced by more skillful prisoners. After each stage of construction, the work was checked by works inspectors, followed by an army inspection which was specially strict, so that sabotage attempts could have been discovered. I did not get a single report of sabotage or attempted sabotage." End of quote. It is virtually impossible today to prove sabotage, but hangings because of it did take place, and the annoyance of the specialists with the Nazi leadership for allowing prisoners to handle their weapons of the future was not very pronounced. Secrecy of production was preserved into 1944. Towards the end of the war, however, the Allies had found Mittelwerk and knew its purpose. The final months of the armaments plant in the Harz Mountains bore all the signs of the coming end.
When the transports arrived from Poland or Russia, we saw piles of bodies every day. You'd stand there and smoke or eat a slice of bread if you had one. You became inured to these things, but that's only human, isn't it?
In jedem Menschen ist und bleibt bis zum letzten
Every
Moment
human being retains a little bit of hope right to the final moment.
der Wille
But survival depended mainly on the will to live.
zum Überleben.
Perhaps you could call that resistance too. The will to live.
Vielleicht auch Widerstand nennen, der Wille zum Leben.
It is said there was a plan to kill thousands of prisoners by blowing the mountain up with them inside. The rocket specialists, meanwhile, were seeking to organize their escape. Documents were burnt or hidden, completed rockets were destroyed, the supply firms in Middle Area closed down, and until April 5, 1945, the SS sent large transports of prisoners on death marches.
Als die amerikanischen Truppen in der Nähe von Weimar waren, hat man uns schnell
When the American troops reached the vicinity of Weimar, we were quickly taken away. It was strange. There were practically no railway wagons available for normal transport anymore, but there were cattle trucks for us prisoners. It was a terrible situation, and many people just couldn't go on any longer and died. Their bodies were thrown off the trains. These trains, with the prisoners in open wagons, passed through German towns, and there were people on bridges and in the streets, and they saw it all.
Diese fahrenden Züge mit den Häftlingen offene Waggons fuhren durch deutsche Städte und Menschen standen auf Brücken an den Straßen und haben das alles mitgesehen.
On April 8th, the Army High Command declared the Harz area a fortress and concentrated 100,000 soldiers there. But by April 15th, this fortress was encircled by the Americans and eventually fell after 10 days. Former leading staff of Mittelwerk were taken prisoner here as well. Shortly before this, on April 11th, units of the 3rd Armoured Division entered Nordhausen, which had been burning since Allied bombing raids on April 3rd and 4th. On the southern outskirts of Nordhausen, the GIs discovered one of Dora's subsidiary camps, Bölke Barracks, which had been badly damaged in the air raids. There a film was made, which was shown all over Europe and overseas on Eisenhower's orders, and which forever linked the town's name with these pictures.
The slave labor camp at Nordhausen, liberated by the 3rd Armored Division, 1st Army. At least 3,000 political prisoners died here at the brutal hands of SS troops and pardoned German criminals who were the camp guards. Nordhausen had been a depository for slaves found unfit for work in the underground V-bomb plants and in other German camps and factories. American medical crews find 2,000 still alive at the camp. They are discovered inside filthy barracks where the survival and death were contingent on how long human existence was possible on the daily ration of potato fields, one slice of bread, and an occasional bowl of a liquid that was supposedly soup. The dead quickly outnumbered the living. Amid the corpses are human skeletons too weak to move. Men of our medical battalions worked 2 days and nights binding wounds and giving medications. But for advanced cases of starvation and tuberculosis, there were often no cures. The survivors are shown being victims are mainly Poles and Russians, with considerable numbers of French and other nationalities also included in the camp roster.
Well-informed specialists of the Operational Ordnance Intelligence teams made systematic search for documents, scientists and leading factory staff. The rockets themselves and the production facilities were to remain untouched because the area was part of the designated Soviet zone of occupation. Following extensive preparations, General Dornberger, Wernher von Braun, Arthur Rudolph and other rocket specialists were taken to the United States in a secret operation despite their Nazi past and in contravention of US laws. The American occupation was not to last for long. On June the 1st, the western part of Middle Area was to come under British control, and on July the 1st, the eastern part was to become part of the Soviet occupation zone. By this time, however, the US Army had finally found the 10 tons of documents it had been looking for so urgently, the Peenemünde archives, and had carted them off. Former Mittelwerk directors had suggested that Kornstein Mountain be blown up to bury the production facilities and everything else, and thus keep this high-tech weapon out of Soviet hands. But this had been rejected by the Americans. Even before the new Soviet local administration had set up its headquarters in Nordhausen, a Russian special commission began the search for hidden art treasures, archives, and other documents, and the secret rocket factory. However, the first Soviet officer to enter the complex had been told to look for a cement factory. The next morning, the entire Soviet administration of Nordhausen, led by the cement specialist, inspected the huge plant. Soon afterwards, the special unit turned up with military police, cordoned off the Kornstein area and placed it under guard. There were hardly any documents left, but vast amounts of material and complete production and test facilities for both the mysterious long-range rocket and other modern weaponry. Even large numbers of German skilled workers and engineers were still found in the Nordhausen area. The Soviet side felt that with the help of all available specialists it should be possible to assemble a V-2 rocket from 21,000 parts on the spot in strict secrecy. The former concentration camp was temporarily used as a quarantine camp, as a labour camp for former members of the Nazi Party and the armed forces, and later still as a transit camp for displaced persons before the huts were finally taken apart and carted away. The underground Mittelwerk equipment was not needed for the reconstruction of the V-2 and was removed as well. In October 1946, in an operation ordered by Stalin, many of the rocket scientists and technicians were taken to the Soviet Union, together with their families and their household goods. There, willingly or not, they helped to lay the foundations of the Soviet space program. By 1948, all machines and other production and test equipment, and even the underground railway tracks, had been removed to the Soviet Union.
Ich glaube, es war 48.
In 48, I think it was said there would be a big explosion inside the Kornstein. Large amounts of dynamite would be taken inside and blown up. Then there was a notice in the papers ordering people in Wofleben, Sachswerfen and Kremderode to leave their villages for a day because of the demolition, in order not to cause loss of life or any other danger to them.
Weil dort diese große Sprengung erfolgt, eben keine Menschenverluste oder überhaupt jemand zu gefährden.
On the day set for the explosion, I went to this spot here to watch, and the explosion took place right on schedule.
Das war auch pünktlich, ging die Sprengung los. Und dann war alles
And
vorbei.
that was it. Later, people who worked here told me that just a bit of the concrete casing had fallen off and nothing much else had happened.
Und die große Wirkung war nicht da.
Due to the ventilation shafts and the closed entrances, the explosion had almost completely failed to accomplish its purpose. So the entrances were blocked again, and the mountain was left as it was. Dora and Mittelwerk stand for a combination of inhumanity and high technology that worked for a time, but ultimately proved a failure. This was not the cradle of spaceflight. If anything, it was its German coffin, at a time when it was believed that anything was possible.